I'm David Matthews, and this is my treasure chest. Today I've got a variety of things to show you, and the first is this. It's a book that I was very keen on as a boy, and it's called How and Why It Works. Oddham's Press, 1948. Now, it has wonderful diagrams and pictures of all the latest technology, at least the latest technology that was around. Here, for instance, is how a dictaphone works. You can see that you speak down this tube and the vibrations of the voice record on wax. And then you can play it back. Of course, if you want to re-record, then you use this device, which is a fine skimmer, to shave off the wax. And things have moved on a bit since those days. If I want to record something now, well, I can simply use my watch. So if I want to record something, I just use my watch. But today I want to ask a simple question of why a kettle boils. I've got an up-to-date kettle here, and how and why it works doesn't have a kettle, but it does have a coffee percolator, which is similar. So if we want to know why a kettle is boiling, we can see something of the anatomy in the book. But let's have a proper up-to-date look at this kettle. And for that we need some equipment. We'll need a test meter, and we'll need some specialist tools and some knowledge. So an old book about electricity here, and my school book here from the time that I was doing A-levels about electricity. So let's go over to the bench and just have a look at how this kettle boils. So we can take the base of this kettle, just undo a few of these screws. You need special tools to do this, and I don't recommend that you do this unless you know what you're doing. Here you can see the element and the switch, and actually if we look at the test meter here, we can see that there's 20 ohms of resistance across that element. That means that this is a 3 kilowatt heater, which we can deduct from Ohm's law. And then there's a switch at the back here. How does that work? Well, that works by a bimetal strip. And a bimetal strip is the way that lots of thermostats work. Here I've taken one out of the back of a Honeywell thermostat, and we'll just show you how it works. Here's some alcohol. We'll just light up the alcohol here, and you can see that the bimetal strip bends sideways. So it's that bend that activates the switch that turns the kettle off. Well, let's just douse that flame. So that basically is how a kettle works. So then we can be absolutely clear why the kettle is boiling. Except that another possible answer to the question, why is the kettle boiling, is that it's boiling because I want a cup of coffee. These answers address two sides of the same question. One answer, the scientific, is about the mechanism, and the other answer is about the meaning. The answers are different, but they don't conflict. I've spent decades doing medical research during the week, mostly about mechanisms, and many times preaching on Sundays, mostly about meaning. They don't contradict each other, provided I don't think that the meaning of the Garden of Eden myth is to teach us about the mechanisms of creation, or that the brutal mechanism of the crucifixion teaches us about the meaning of salvation. Now, all this muddling up of meaning and mechanisms is not new. It's been around for at least 2,000 years. Jesus ran into it himself. Here's the Jerusalem Bible, which I particularly like for its printing poetry properly. So set out here in John's Gospel, you can see poetry written out as poetry and prose written out as prose. So all of this poetry is Jesus speaking. Let's look at chapter 3 here, which is the conversation with Nicodemus. There was one of the Pharisees called Nicodemus, a leading Jew, who came to Jesus by night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who comes from God, for no one can perform the signs that you do unless God were with him." And Jesus answered, "I tell you most solemnly, unless a man is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." And Nicodemus said, How can a grown man be born? Can he go back into his mother's womb and be born again?" And Jesus replied, "I tell you most solemnly, unless a man is born through water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." Look, here is Nicodemus speaking. He's talking obstetrics, while Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God. They talk at right angles to each other, and this even shows on the page. Here is Nicodemus talking horizontally, and here is Jesus speaking vertically. It's the intersection of mechanism and meaning, or if you like, mechanism and metaphor too. The central message of the Gospels is all about meaning. So, back to our kettle. Mechanism and meaning. To the question, why is the kettle boiling? I can tell you about the electrical mechanism, but the other answer to the question, and very often the more relevant one, is about meaning.
David, I thought you might like a cup of coffee.
Oh, thanks very much. Great. Yes.